Well, for me, writing is about reading, and the point of origin for everything I do is my love of books and my desire to, in a sense, reply to them, to take a kind of relationship to them that's more active than just being a reader, but to find a way to talk back. And the earliest influences on my writing life, writers that I discovered as a teenager or even as a kid, like Lewis Carroll, Graham Greene, Shirley Jackson, they're still very alive in me. And I reread them and I think about them, and they're the foundation of what I do. But I also am constantly discovering new writing that nourishes me and inspires me. I just, these last couple of months, have been voraciously reading the Chilean writer Roberto Bolaño, who's an enormous discovery for a lot of folks, and I'm right there with him. He suddenly seems to me an essential writer and someone who will change the way I think about my work, and that's natural for me. Even 8, 9, 10 books down the line as I am, my voice isn't something that's hardened and absolute. It's something that grows and changes and responds, and I hope it always will be capable of doing that. There are certain books and certain writers that I go to for nourishment, and somehow they're at the core of what I do, and they re-energize me. Don DeLillo's White Noise is an example. Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Philip K. Dick's novels, which I've had the privilege of becoming the editor of for the Library of America. I've been helping annotate and reintroduce these novels in there as they've been entered into the canon, essentially, which is what the Library of America represents. So it's been a great privilege to spend time with them and pore over them line by line and rediscover the source of so much inspiration. Because when I was a beginning writer, when I was 17, 18, 19, I couldn't think of anything better than to try to write exactly like Philip K. Dick. I was not only influenced by him, I was a shameless imitator back then. And there's so many others. James Salter, Light Years, that's a book that continues to amaze me every time I revisit it. The stories of Chekhov, the stories of Graham Greene, many, many others. Kafka, these things are somehow at the center of my, more than just my writing life, they're at the center of my life. They're something I go to just remember how I feel and think about the world. Well, I came of age as a writer in an unusual way. I was trained as a visual artist. My father was a painter, and I went to art school. I went to music and art high school, and then on to college expecting to paint. And a lot of my vocabulary, even as I was a voracious reader, and in some ways I was preparing almost unconsciously for a writer's life. I was collecting the resources and defining the interests that turned me into a writer. I was also spending a lot of time looking at modern art and trying to make art. And, the 20th century, if you look at the art movements of the 20th century, practically every one of them, from Cubism to Surrealism and Dada, to American post-abstract expressionist work, pop art, Andy Warhol, Lichtenstein, Rauschenberg, one artist after another is, at some level, grabbing onto materials and making collages or making references, visual references to pop culture. This, to me, always seemed very natural, whether it was Andy Warhol taking newsprint headlines and photographs, or Rauschenberg grabbing onto scraps of magazines, or Picasso grabbing onto scraps of things. I thought, of course, this is how you respond to the world around you. You grab onto it and you throw it into the work. Now, literary art has always been, in some ways, more resistant to this method. It's so much at the core of modernism that you do find it. You find it in something like T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land and all sorts of other places. But it's not as easy. It's not as obvious, anyway, how you take collage methods and bring them, especially into more traditional narrative literary writing. the novel and the short story. But I like to try. And there are ways to do it, and I've found ways to do it, sometimes in a very overt or obvious way, and sometimes it's just a kind of buried or subliminal influence where I'll take a few lines from a song lyric that I love or from someone else's writing or poetry and build it into a paragraph, build it into the speech of my characters, build it in somehow. And I'm always very excited when I can do that. It generates for me a lot of energy and a lot of excitement. And it certainly isn't something that I think of as an exotic or alien method. It's just when I can access it, it's one of the tools in my toolkit. It's part of what I do. I've really let it go. It's a funny time to ask me that question because it used to be very simple. I would say, no, I stopped. When I began writing a novel at age 19, in the middle of my freshman year of college, I became so enthralled with that I basically stopped painting and have never looked back. The only reason I hesitate is that now that I've got a kid, I find that he wants to draw, and we've got crayons in the house, and I find myself drawing for him. He loves animals, so every other day I'm drawing a horse or a cow, and it's a funny moment for me because I'm recapturing a little bit of just the pleasure. It's just almost a physical pleasure of making a line with a crayon or coloring something and realizing how much a part of my life it used to be, I could never become ambitious the way I was to be a painter because all of that has moved into my writing life. But the tactile pleasure can be reawakened from time to time. Well, it's a boggling question, and of course one of my first responses to it is to hope that it's headed everywhere. The thing about literary writing is that it should be an immense and contradictory field. It should consist of different methods, different responses, different approaches to the world. So I would hate to see or think that it could only go to one place or have one simple destination or style. One of the things that I am most excited about right now is that I see novelists, in particular, finding new ways to respond to the media culture, which is a constant challenge, not just for art, not just for writing, but for living life. We live in such an enormous, explosive time of, digital media and commercial media, advertising. Pop culture is a kind of, it's a Niagara Falls. And it can be overwhelming, but I think it can also be an incredible source if you find ways to carve out a response to it and not just turn your back on all of this stuff and say, well, literary writing needs to be off here alone in a quiet place or in a high tower, but to say, okay, how do we engage? What do we say back to, gaming culture or blog culture? What do we say? How do we reply to, Hollywood and commercial media of so many different kinds? And you can see novelists contending with it, and I think that's one of the jobs of a writer, with a form as versatile and large, encompassing as the novel can be, to find a way to open itself to all these new languages that are being invented on the spot.